More than a half century since Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam were convicted of the assassination of Malcolm X, a murder they and the man who confessed to the murder have always maintained they did not commit, their names have finally been cleared.
We are moving today to vacate the convictions and dismiss the indictments of Muhammad Aziz and Khalil Islam for the assassination of Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, a prominent voice for black empowerment during the civil rights movement, rose to prominence as a spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. But shortly before his death, he left that group and started another, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He was about to give a speech in Upper Manhattan when he was attacked by 3 gunmen who fired more than a dozen shots, killing him in front of his wife, 3 of his children, and a crowd of hundreds. One man, Mujahid Halim, was wounded, immediately arrested, and later admitted to his role in the murder. Aziz and Islam were arrested several days later, and although all 3 were members of the Nation of Islam, which was in increasing conflict with Malcolm X since he left the group, they all repeatedly said that Aziz and Islam had nothing to do with the assassination. And yet, Manhattan County prosecutors tried them anyway. And despite a lack of any physical evidence, a reliance on eyewitness statements that contradicted each other, not to mention exculpatory evidence we later learned was withheld from the defense, those prosecutors got their convictions, and Aziz and Islam were sentenced to 20 years to life for murder. The pair spent a combined 42 years in prison, including stints in solitary confinement, before they were released on parole in the 80s. Islam died in 2009. But then last year, a Netflix docuseries called Who Killed Malcolm X uncovered new information and, aided by my next guest, reopened the conversation about the trial and sparked a new investigation into the case by the Manhattan DA's office, which led to last week's exonerations.
I apologize on behalf of our nation's law enforcement for this decades-long injustice, which has eroded public faith in institutions that are designed to guarantee equal protection of the law.
I'm an 83-year-old man who was victimized by the criminal justice system. I hope the same system that was responsible for this travesty of justice also takes responsibility for the immeasurable harm caused to me during the last 55 or 56 years.
I'm joined now by 2 lawyers who played a crucial role in clearing Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam's names. Barry Scheck, the co-founder of the Innocence Project, and David Shanies, a civil rights attorney who focuses on wrongful convictions. David, good to meet you. Barry, it's good to see you as always. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barry, if I can start with you, as I mentioned a minute ago, Mr. Halim, who not only admitted his involvement, was convicted, tells the jury that Aziz and Islam have nothing to do with it in the mid-60s. A decade later, he not only says again that they had nothing to do with it, but identifies the men who did have something to do with it. Yet Aziz and Islam were in jail for another 10 years and had to wait many decades more, well, obviously in one of their cases didn't live for it, until their names were cleared. What took so long?
Well, the first and most important part of this is when Halim got on the witness stand and said, first he said, I'm innocent, I didn't do it, which was obviously insane. And then he said, I did do it. There were 4 other people involved. Now, remember, he comes from a mosque in New Jersey. Yeah. At the time he said that, the FBI and the New York City Police Department, the Bossie Squad, something I know you remember, the old Red Squad, they had information in their files that corroborated what Halim was saying and identified the shotgun shooter who was supposed to be Islam. By the way, an individual who met the description of one of the defense witnesses. And they had all this information in their possession. If they had done what they were supposed to do, and that is disclose it, think of this, to the district attorney. And the district attorney had then disclosed that to the defense and to the court. The fact of the matter is that would have changed the course of the civil rights movement in this country, because what it would have exposed is that they had undercover police officers, one on the stage, Gene Roberts, who was not even known to the other NYPD people or the FBI. They had FBI informants in the audience. They had all of this information, and it might have exposed what we all know became Operation COINTELPRO later, and the disruption of the Black power and civil rights movement in this country.
So, David, why were these two men in particular targeted, meaning Aziz and Islam, as opposed to others who had nothing to do with it? Why them?
Yeah, we don't have definitive answers to that question. They were members of the Harlem Mosque in the Nation of Islam. They were known to law enforcement for that reason. They were officers within the mosque. They were both lieutenants. But I think most fundamentally, they were two young, Black, poor Muslims who were not in a position to defend themselves adequately, and in many ways were an easy target for law enforcement, who was looking to close the case quickly against whoever it might be, and frame ultimately two innocent men.
Yeah, I still, David, staying with you for a second, I still don't understand. I understand when the testimony of Mr. Halim changes, Barry said a minute ago, but subsequently, when I guess it was Bill Kunstler who was pleading the case yet again, when he was willing to identify, this is Halim, I think it was 4 men who said they were involved, and I believe most, if not all, were still alive at the time. Why didn't this come to a head in whatever year that was, 77 or whatever year it was in the late 70s, as opposed to 2021, David?
Essentially for the same reason that that Barry described in terms of the original trial, because a mountain of exculpatory evidence of our clients' innocence and the guilt of the true perpetrators was hidden by the NYPD, was hidden by the FBI, including Gene Roberts, as Barry mentioned, the undercover and what he had to offer, and the names and or descriptions of all 4 of the assassins who Halim named as his fellow perpetrators.
And Barry, was Hoover the man behind all this suppression, or was there a whole spectrum of people doing this?
Well, I don't think we can understate the culpability of J. Edgar Hoover. Because when you actually see the exculpatory documents that David and I read, and which frankly have been around for historians for years, I get the chills when I see hours after the assassination, memos to Hoover basically saying, look for this lieutenant from New Jersey Mosque, or leads to that effect, that they were getting months later. It's so disgusting, frankly, to realize that very quickly it became obvious that this assassination involved people in the New Jersey Mosque. And Hoover had to know that. The Bossie squad in New York had to know that. And they didn't care that 2 other individuals were on trial. It was collateral damage. They did not want to reveal the undercover officers. It's that simple.
Barry, when you said a minute ago the history of the civil rights movement would have been changed, can you flesh that out just a little bit more for me?
Sure. Maybe for some viewers, it might be as easy as understanding the movie View from Miami, right? Mm-hmm. Which was about the famous meeting between Muhammad Ali, Jim Braude, Sam Cooke, and the, Judah and the Black Messiah, right? Which Judas and the Black Messiah, which shows the assassination of Fred Hampton, essentially, the murder of Fred Hampton. There was something in this country that I know, Jim, you were very well aware of, Operation COINTELPRO. This was a deliberate effort by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and at times assisted by local police officials, to disrupt the civil rights movement and to create agent provocateurs and fratricidal violence. And if you want to read a book that best describes this, take a look at Les and Tamara Payne's most recent history or biography of Malcolm X, The Dead Are Arising. Last year, it won the National Book Award. This year, it won the Pulitzer Prize. And it's really worth people reading if they want to understand the history of this movement.
David, the other day we were talking on my radio show about the exoneration of Mr. Aziz. And I don't mention Mr. Islam because he's obviously died a while ago. And the sense I got was other than his words, there was, from lay people, there was celebration that there was finally justice. But in my experience, having interviewed people like you and Barry have gotten off after decades, either in jail or under a cloud, it really never ends. Can you describe for a second, I know it's hard because there's no one size fits all, what life is like even after these moments came, like happened for Mr. Aziz last week?
Well, you know, in his very brief statement in court last Thursday, Muhammad talked about feeling glad for his family members and supporters and the attorneys who fought for him and believed in him all these years. And that's consistently what he expressed to me after this event. I got no sense that he felt glad for himself or felt celebratory in any way, because the sad reality is the loss and devastation that a wrongful conviction like this in particular causes, not only the loss of freedom, but living 35 years with the stigma of being the convicted murderer of a great civil rights icon, that causes enormous damage. It destroyed relationships, destroyed families, it destroyed lives. And that's all done and in the past, and nothing can undo that, unfortunately.
Yep. Barry, I want to play a little more for you from Cy Vance in the courtroom the other day. Here he is at that hearing.
Your Honor, we can't restore what was taken away from these men and their families. But by correcting the record, perhaps we can begin to restore that faith.
You know, as I'm listening to those words today, preparing for you two guys to come on, Barry, I happen upon the Washington Post, and I read about a case that the Midwest Innocence Project is involved in, Kevin Strickland, that in so many ways is almost a carbon copy. 43 years in jail, triple murder. One of the men who admitted to the triple murder said all along that Mr. Strickland had nothing to do with it. The only eyewitness, in quotes, recanted her testimony repeatedly, yet until last week, Strickland spent 43 years in jail. My takeaway, and I'm not nearly as close to this as you guys are every day, is it is rare that there is ever systemic reform in response to the work that you do, but rather just individual redress in cases where you have the person power to lead to exonerations. Is that an unfair statement?
I actually think we can say a little bit more about that. First of all, I'm very familiar with the Strickland case and another one, Lamar Johnson, which is coming out of St. Louis, right? In these cases, the Attorney General's office in Missouri is intervening to try to stop the local conviction integrity unit from actually rectifying an injustice. And we can get some legislation passed in this country. It doesn't look like we're going to get the George Floyd Act passed in Congress, but individually, state by state, it's extremely important to get transparency about past acts of misconduct by police officers and identify those who, you know, you can have knowledge, don't tell the truth in cases and don't play by the rules. And that kind of legislation is best exemplified by a bill in California, Senate Bill 2, that just passed, that creates a unique identifier for all cops. It's the only way we'll ever be able to track them. And one standard for everybody gets a license and they can be decertified in California, all law enforcement officials starting in 2023. If they violate certain statewide rules, it gets beyond all these restrictions that police unions have put into contracts in lots of different states, including the ones we live in.
Well, let me stay with you, Barry, for a second and allow my cynicism to be exposed one more time. I was naive enough to think, like a lot of people, after 26 and 7-year-olds were slaughtered in Sandy Hook, that we'd see gun reform. I was also naive enough to think that after the work of people like you and David, that we'd see an end to the death penalty. And I'm just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court, as you know, rejects a death row inmate's appeal when not only his lawyers, but the prosecution urged the court to reconsider. So even if it's one step forward, as you're suggesting in places like California, isn't it more one step back on the big on the big stage?
Well, not really, Jim, I hope. And that is that criminal justice reform is ordinarily a state-by-state proposition, right? And there are some efforts being made in Massachusetts now to deal with this. If we can have conviction integrity units that really will work on it, we'll be able to more systematically get innocent people out of jail. That movement has really grown enormously, and the number of exonerations is truly impressive, but it's not enough because we haven't done enough really to cut to the heart of all the past injustice, the secret information that police departments can be forced to disclose. And we have to be able to systematically root out from law enforcement in this country officers that don't play by the rules and have standards to discipline them.
David, I only have 45 seconds left. Do you share Barry's perspective on this?
I do. I think that Barry's absolutely right that there have been reforms that really matter. I mean, to take New York, where we are as an example, in recent years, the repeal of the law that made police disciplinary records absolutely secret, the widespread implementation of body cameras in a lot of police departments, including the New York City Police Department, the recording of interrogations in particular. Those are all crucial efforts to try to prevent wrongful convictions rather than clean up the damage once it's been done.
Well, I am thrilled to be proven wrong by you two. Barry, David, thanks so much for your time, and I appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.